We're good. Call to order, City Mayville Common Council Special Budget Meeting, 7 p.m. December 14th. Please take the roll.
Alderman Tillman.
Here.
Alderman Newman.
Here.
Alderperson Olson. Here. Alderman Schmidt.
Your quorum is present. Item 2, Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. Okay, item number 3, the public hearing portion. Public comments on the 2024 budget and 2023 tax levy. Is that sheet, did it make it back here? Probably. Citizen comments will be kept to a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker. Unless chairperson allows for an extension of time. Each citizen is to make comments at the podium after stating name and address. Each citizen may comment only one time per public hearing or meeting. Keith Lodahl, would you care to speak?
I have no reason to speak.
Okay. Rob Bell?
I have a written statement. If you want to read in the record, I have copies for the council. Rob Bell, 235 North Clark Street, Mayville, Vice Chair of the Dodge County Board. First of all, I want to thank the Finance Committee and the staff for all their hard work on the budget with the limited amount of resources available in the mayor's 2-week deadline, November 15th. So I want to thank you guys for all your hard work. Also want to thank Mr. Meeks for giving me the details I requested upon and appreciate it. A few things I want to discuss is, I want the council to consider is that I would like to address the $650,000 in extra revenue sources the mayor stated last month at the meeting. I'd like to know how much was the actual revenues and the funding sources. I did not see the TIDs in the budget, and I'd like to know the tax increments were put into the appropriate TIF fund. As you know, we made a mistake a few years ago when I was mayor, so I want to make sure that's in there. The police officer union was given a raise this past Monday. I would like to know if the pay raises were calculated in the 2023 budget. It was given to the Dodge County last week. If not, what is the tax increment will be? The newspaper calculation was off and the mill rate looks way off. So what was the actual rate and what was the calculation sent to the county last week? I'm thinking it was somewhere around 579, maybe 580. The assessed values also looked off. I have the assessed values at $481,966,700 for 2023. Might be some cost savings since the numbers in the paper were lower. Special assessments was at 0. Didn't we have any kind of water to sewer late penalties? And Bridge Street project, which did some special assessments, I believe. My contingency was budgeted at 0. Typically, we budget around $10,000 so we can pay for the extra expenses around hiring and police union contract, so we don't fall short. Capital projects wasn't put into the budget for 2024. So I would like to know what would be the tax increase in the 2025 budget, an anticipated $2.4 million of borrowing. Since it's part of the 2024 budget, so since it's not part of the 2024 budget, I should say, you can actually delay capital improvement borrowing for at least a couple months to get some more information. The city has a resolution. The city has a resolution or ordinance of keeping $800,000 in reserve and general fund. What will the final reserve general fund balance be going forward in 2024? And I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and Happy Holiday Season. I know it's been a stressful time for most, but that's all I have. Thank you.
Merry Christmas to you.
Thank
you.
Merry Christmas.
Roger Smith,
No comment?
okay? Becky Smith,
No.
Bob Smith,
No.
all right. Jerry, citizen comments? You good? All right. No additional citizen comments. I would take a motion to adjourn the public hearing.
So move.
Motion by Schmidt,
I will second.
second by Tillman. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Public hearing is adjourned. Are there any other general citizen comments for the meeting tonight? Okay, please. Sherry Davis, just, maximum of 5 minutes per speaker. Just please state your name and your address.
You know me as Sheree Davis, address 223 North John Street. That is up.
No, it's fine. Yeah, that's not right.
General,
If you sit there, they can hear you better,
oh,
if you'd like to, that's up to you.
am I?
No,
I'm
I'm,
not
so-
obligated.
no, you're not, I'm just letting you know that these people can see you and hear you way better.
They need to see me.
Please continue.
All right.
We're starting the time over. Go ahead.
All right, general comment, for budget wise, my opinion is just that, my opinion. I have seen both sides of everything that's kind of going on between the cities and what we had before and what we have now. I feel that what we had before was very complicated. Nobody knew what money was where. Me being on the park board, it was very complicated to not know where money was, where it was supposed to be. And the fact that we actually had someone coming in trying to figure that out, made me feel good. So that's just my opinion there, because, honestly, when I first moved here, I didn't have a lot of, how do you say it? Trust and in the boards that were here, because they were making such weird decisions for the city. I always bring up this example of the prior council, voting to make everyone pay for their laterals. And of course, they reversed that after, I guess, rethinking that, maybe some citizens thinking up. Got grant, it was just some of the thinking and where the money was going and what, the finance company. And I just never understood why the money wasn't where it was supposed to be, especially sitting on the park board and going, okay, well, why don't we know what this budget is? Why is this money not where it's supposed to be? For me to have someone coming in trying to also figure that out is very important to me. Because I care so much about the parks in town. I don't want to see our parks dilapidated, whatever. And that's happening. You got, the bandstand, the little brown, they're so ugly. I'm surprised they haven't failed right now. That needs to be done, replaced. It's so much. And then I understand about why the taxes are raising. We have to pay for stuff somehow. I would rather see cuts than raises, so we don't have to. And I think sometimes maybe the city, maybe you guys should make the tough cuts. I feel that Mayville is a very spoiled city. There's so many privileges that people just take advantage of or don't appreciate enough until it's taken away. And then maybe they'd be like, oh, okay, well, maybe we do need to give a little more money to take care of the stuff that they want. It's very important that people realize this, and a lot of people don't. So I kind of like the fact that we are moving on in the current direction of fixing our finances. I just don't want to go backwards. I don't want to see our finances going back to what we were prior to this administration. So that's kind of how I feel in general. Lots more, but you know.
Thank you.
But I do appreciate you giving me some time to say my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any additional citizen comments? Then if not, we'll move on to item 5, which is a consent agenda inclusive of 7 items, which were passed and recommended by the finance committee. So this would be these 7 items. The common council would be ratifying the approvals of the finance committee made this prior meeting. So before we do a vote, does anybody care to take any of the 7 items off of the consent agenda and put them onto the regular agenda for discussion? Seeing as there are no requests, then we can move right into the vote for the consent agenda. I'll read in the items. First item, approve finance committee recommendation bonus for Nicole DeBaker for the hours worked from June through December 2023, assisting City Hall. 2, approve finance committee recommendation, the e-scribe quote from James Coolin from e-scribe meetings. 3, approve finance committee recommendation payment to DPI for the printing, folding, and stuffing in the 2023 tax statements and inserts. 4, approve finance committee recommendation, the updated quote for the iPhone system, or excuse me, not the iPhone, the phone system from Wise Guy IT. 5, approve finance committee recommendation hiring Amanda Laubenstein as interim deputy clerk for the election preparation. 6, approve finance committee recommendation entering into agreement with Dodge County to provide interim election services, Karen Gibson's proposal. And 7, approve finance committee recommendation work study program for Mayville High School, hourly rate for the interns at $12 per hour. So I take a motion to pass the consent agenda.
Just really quick.
Yeah.
Wanted to hit on 6. We had the email from Karen.
Yes,
Everyone wanted to see that or look at that.
we can pull it. So I'm not concerned that. Let's pull that one off just so we can talk about it. How about
Okay.
that? All right.
Yeah, let's do that.
So a motion by Newman. Anybody want to second that?
I'll second.
Okay. Actually, I'm sorry, it doesn't even, I'm sorry, Carl, it does not require a motion, but we'll just move that to.
Next
We'll make it item B under the mayor's report. Okay, so would anybody care to make a motion to pass the consent agenda items 1 through 7, less item 6?
Motion to approve.
Okay, motion by Tillman,
Second.
second by Newman. Finance involved, we'll take the roll, please.
Joe Tillman,
Aye.
Ken Newman,
Aye.
Kim Olson,
I,
and Mike Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Next item, report of the officers, mayor's report, regarding the 2024 budget. I think, first of all, I share many of the same sentiments. Just wanted to give thanks to folks, especially the department heads. You know, my experience in working with the department heads through the entire budget process has been, you know, they have demonstrated time and time again that they truly take personal ownership over their budget responsibilities. And I have tremendous confidence in the way that they manage and approach their financial responsibility for their department. So kudos to them. Spent countless hours preparing well-prepared budget numbers for this upcoming year. And there have been many examples where department heads have gone out of their way to really learn, you know, about what it is we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing from a financial standpoint. They're asking great questions. They're seeking to understand, and that's just gonna make this process, you know, better as time continues forward. For the council, I have to call out Alderman Joe Tillman, you know, as finance chair. I just want to say thank you. You took a lot of time out of your busy schedule and personal life to not only learn all of this, but to engage and really truly take ownership of learning the entire budget process. So thank you. Finance committee members, I want to thank you for dedicating so many hours in the council chamber reviewing budget items line by line for a number of meetings. I know that was a big time commitment, so thank you for that. We have a couple of quasi governmental entities that are a part of the budget process as well. The water and wastewater commissioners, I want to thank them, as well as Courtney Stager and Nicole DeBaker for putting together a sound budget presentation for the utility. And of course, the library board did an excellent job as well. So thank you all for that. The next portion, we're going to discuss item 6, which we pulled in here, but I do want to say, you know, first of all, thank you, Tony Meeks, Cameron Sawyer, thank you. For those of you that don't know Cameron, he's a consultant, he's a former Baker Tilly guy, and he is a finance director for another municipality in the state, and he just brings a wealth of knowledge. Tony has a tremendous amount of knowledge as well. Tony moved here from Illinois, and Wisconsin has a lot of very interesting nuances about it in terms of, you know, how you manage the finances and when you get the information in and how. So just the knowledge transfer is critical for the ongoing success of restoring, you know, proper governance of the city's finances. So thank you both. We are going to, I mean, these gentlemen to my left are the most important part of this presentation, right? They're going to present the budget. They're going to speak to the line items. I'm sure many of the questions that were asked earlier will naturally be answered as a part of that process. And we're going to, you know, the objective from day one is to make this the most transparent process we can. We can't deliver it directly to everybody's front step, but I think by putting it on the internet and giving the opportunity to come to open meetings, if you choose to get involved, your voice will be heard, and I encourage you to please do so. Also, Nolan Franti, our attorney, is here to speak to any questions as it relates to compliance. I come from kind of a compliance background, so clearly there are certain state statutes as it relates to deadlines and getting things in and when you send out your bills and these types of things. So if any questions arise here, Nolan's here to answer questions on those matters. So I will stop. Thank you all very much. And with that, we'll move on real quickly. So the item 6, which we pulled off the consent agenda, I'll make as item B under the report of officers. So this was approve the finance committee recommendation, entering into an agreement with Dodge County to provide interim election services. Karen Gibson from Dodge County, she's the Dodge County clerk, has been very gracious in working with the city and helping Christine to prepare and also arm us with information of, you know, regarding what needs to be done when. And she had suggested that the county can offer assistance and services to help us stay on top of things with the election. With us moving forward with Amanda coming in to help and her skill set, I don't think we're going to need to rely much on the county. So although the motion was made to approve those services, it would be as needed. So I think the total amount of the statement of work was roughly $3,000. If we don't use it at all, it won't cost a thing. But just having it there as an option, I think would be because I'm sure Karen Gibson is going to be operating in a kind of a consulting capacity here and there to help Amanda and the city until we get a city clerk. That's my 2 cents on it.
Don't mind if I could also
Please.
speak on that.
Yeah.
So I went to the county last Friday and had a conversation with Karen. I do want to point out to this council that it is not uncommon that the county treasurer provides assistance to municipalities. It hasn't happened in the past for Mayville, but they do offer this for municipalities that don't have the resources to be able to have somebody dedicated for elections. The one thing that they will not do is they will not step in and handle any of the WISPO and absentee side of things. So my recommendation is when Amanda gets started, that she focus on making sure she has a full understanding of that process. And then eventually, as she picks up, Karen can backfill. Karen can do less and less until she's comfortable, just to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. But again, there are certain things that with the county and that contract, they are not allowed to do. The absentee and WIS vote and tracking that is one of those things. And it is very time consuming and very important to maintain daily.
So somebody care to make a motion to,
Just one question.
Yeah.
Do we have all the people, now that from the past that helped out?
so there are, and I'm sorry, I don't want to talk over you.
No.
Okay, so, I think I've gotten responses back from nearly everybody.
All right. good.
Yeah, so we're doing well on staffing. We'll probably have 6 people to add in the January council meeting, just to get their terms extended.
Another thing that Karen had mentioned is that it sounds like you guys are in the middle of potentially changing polling locations from here to the new library. She just wanted to emphasize that there might be some additional resources needed in the transition year. While you might have poll workers who worked in this building going from a completely new setup, there is gonna be some heartburn with that process. So just be ready for maybe a process that is a little bit longer and takes a little bit more effort.
Any further discussion on the topic of entering into the agreement with Dodge County as backup?
I'll, make a motion to enter into an agreement with Dodge County for assistance with voting.
Okay, that motion is by Kim Olson. Is there a second?
No second.
Second by Joe Tillman. Any further discussion? Please take the roll.
Joe Tillman,
Aye.
Ken Newman,
Aye.
Kim Olson,
Aye.
and Mike Schmidt.
Aye.
All right, thank you all. Next item 7, committees, commissions and boards, finance committee. Presentations from Tony Meeks and Cameron Sawyer on the 2024 budget.
Thank you. So before we get started, I just want to remind us where I live, breathe this every day. So if for some reason I either go too quickly or you need additional information on a budget line item, please, I will have periodic stops to make sure that you guys are getting your questions answered as we're going through this. So what you'll have in front of you is a printed out detailed budget of every fund for the city of Mayville. I know it might be exciting to try to page through it as quickly as possible, but let's make sure that you know, we stick on the page, and I will kind of cue when you need to go either to the next page or a different section of the budget. So obviously the front page of the budget obviously reads the 2014 City Mayville proposed budget, with the December 14th being the public hearing date. On November 30th, the public hearing notice was properly posted in the newspaper, giving us the full 15-day public hearing notice to be able to have this meeting tonight. On the back of the front page, because we did print this side to side, you'll kind of see what I would consider an executive summary. Because this really is a good summation of the significant changes between this year's budget and last year's budget, I will actually make sure I read this for those who are listening to this meeting, because this does at a high level kind of correspond with what's already been completed thus far. So in the overview, the 2024 budget is a combination of countless hours, meetings, and collaboration over the past months. The most notable change from the 2023 and 2024 budget is highlighted by the recommendation to hire a full-time administrator. In addition, Act 12 has provided some relief in the form of supplemental aid, which is intended to offset the increased costs in providing public safety. That amount in the proposed budget is approximately $200,000. Additionally, the pot of money for supplemental aid will increase as sales tax revenue increases for the state. Meaning if in 2024, or the state realizes a 4% increase in their sales tax bucket, you would expect that base amount of your approximate 200,000 to increase. For those who haven't been on this council before, and I know the history of shared revenue has been frozen largely since 2003, meaning most municipalities were working with the same amount of money that the state had given and allocated since 2003. Now, why that's important, I don't have the specific year, at one point in time, unlike other states, Wisconsin got together and local municipalities gave up their right to administer a sales tax in exchange for an agreement that the state will manage that program and distribute what's called shared revenue. And again, that right was kind of taken away from municipalities in 2003 when it was frozen. So that's why you see today many municipalities struggling with maintaining existing services under the current levy limit restraints. The capital investment overview, the proposed budget has 8 major capital improvements funded with a combination of grant funding and financing through debt. The finance projects include a $1.3 million for a ladder truck, $250,000 on road work, $180,000 for a front loader, $80,000 for park shelter building roof / maintenance, $80,050 for a police squad and upfitting, $150,000. Oh, sorry. I want to go back. The next 4 items are funded through ARPA funding, meaning you are not taking debt out to fund these projects. So again, that starts with the police squad and upfitting at $80,050, EMS ambulance at $150,000, which is the remaining balance or part 2 of the payment from last year. A park mule and park study at $27,500, and a tag center washer and dryer at $17,185. Just a reminder, that's to those who are listening, those are not the washer and dryer that you have at your home. These are commercial, industrial washer and dryer needed to, wash and dry towels and other things, etc. at the building. Just a note here, a portion of the proposed 2024 financing calls for funding repainting the water tower. Final financing will be brought forward to the appropriate covered bodies at that time. So while during this budget process, you are tentatively approving these projects, the corresponding debt will have to come back to the governing bodies to approve with an Ellers recommendation. What I typically see happen is interest rates may change from what was initially proposed. So you might have better financing. What that doesn't change is when you take out debt, the effect of that debt, it actually does not hit the 2024 budget. You won't start making interest and principal payments until 2025. So regardless of the change of the cost of the financing, there will be no impact to the 2024 budget. The next note I have here is, inflation has been a significant challenge for Mayville and other local municipalities. Wisconsin CPIU, which is a reasonable index to use for the cost of labor and good for local municipalities, have been between 6 and 8% throughout 2023. The proposed budget calls for an increase in the tax levy of $272,965, or a 9.98% increase. I do want to note that, however, does not necessarily correspond with the 9.98% increase in the local portion of your taxes. As this council may know, the tax rate is based off of assessed value. So once the final assessed value is determined for each property, it is then the base that is approved for the levy is allocated to each property to come up with a final tax bill. The proposed levy in the budget that you see before you tonight is $2,736,327, which would result in a mill rate of 5.77. Because there was a question on this, I'll go out a couple more decimal places. So it was 5.771951. Based off of a $482,075 482,075,500 approximate assessed valuation for the city of Mayville. The maximum amount that the city could have levied for the 2023 property taxes was 2,799,673. As I stated before, what's proposed is $2,736,327, meaning that the city is not budgeting to its maximum capacity. The assessment ratio or ratio of the assessed value compared to the fair market value is 91.19%. What is important for this body to understand is once that gets below 90%, there's a limited amount of time you have to do a revaluation. And why revaluations are important is because you want to make sure how the tax bills is getting divided is equal and consistent. So the longer you go in between valuation is the potential that how that tax is allocated on your taxing jurisdiction may be less accurate or based off of old information. The last statement I have here on our cover memo is the city should continue to work on finding ways to balance the general fund. As presented, the 2024 budget has a projected deficit of $180,314. Current reserves can support the projected deficit while staying within the recommended fund balance. However, this is not a long-term funding solution. I do want to remind this body that at the end of 2022, your fund balance was 35.8%. And you have an approved policy, resolution 4341/2009, to have 28% of subsequent years expenditures. So meaning as the budget is presented, you can stay within your fund balance policy, but making sure that going forward, looking for ways to pass a balanced budget or not having a deficit. Now I'm going to take a moment here and stop. I threw a lot at you. Like I said, I live and breathe this every day. I want to make sure I answer any questions for the council just on this cover, but we'll get in the rest of the meat here shortly.
I have quick question. So we just did a revaluation just a year ago, and we're almost to that 10%.
Which is crazy because Wisconsin saw one of the largest increases in equalized value in recent history. I can throw out a Dane County statistic, 14% increase in equalized value in Dane County. So basically meaning in 1 year, almost every municipality fell out of compliance. And when I say fell out of compliance, you have a certain amount of years after falling out of compliance before you're forced to do a revaluation. What I could see and what there's been talk around kind of the local government circle is there might be a market correction. So you actually might see this percentage go up next year where it could end up being at 93 or 94%, or temporarily go down to 87% one more year and then back up. So I caution on making a rash decision once you get under 90% and really get an understanding of the full period of time you have to do the value revaluation and understanding your options.
Okay.
Hearing no questions on the kind of cover memo. The next page is really what I kind of use as my Bible of the 2024 budget. And really the general fund is your operating fund. And what I mean by operating fund is truly your ins and outs. The vast majority of your activity in municipality flows through your general fund. The city has approximately 26 funds in total. And when I mean funds, individual balance sheets and revenue and income statements that the finance department is responsible, or the comptroller, treasurer office is responsible of maintaining. One potential recommendation I may have in the near future is consolidating where necessary to help departments and other staff better understand what funds are available and what they're able to be used for. But that is a discussion for another day. So as you can see, I put a column in here for 2022 actuals. So at the end of 2022, you had a $251,000 surplus, resulting in a year-end fund balance of 2.1 million. The 2023 budget as passed had a deficit of $146,905, resulting in a planned use of fund balance of $1,997,443. What I estimate, and spending many hours with Tony, looking at your financial information, is a pretty solid estimate of where I believe you guys will end up at the end of the year, is a $76,958,000 surplus, resulting in an actual gain of fund balance to be $2.2 million. I do want to mention that I don't look at that as a structural surplus, because a vast majority of that surplus is a result of open positions. So while yes, we can look at that as a positive thing, we just want to keep in mind that that doesn't necessarily indicate positive budget performance. Lastly, the 2024 proposed budget, went through countless, again, meetings that you guys had, working through Sickage's spreadsheets and things that they put, and summarized all the information. In addition to providing a couple things that, you guys should also consider tonight. I want to go over a couple of the percent changes, because I do think that's, valuable for you guys to have an understanding. I think we did a good summary, and we will continue as we go through the general fund budget, explain why the levy had increased. What I will then start is taxes. When I listened on another meeting, there was a lot of conversation about what's called pilot and confusion about what that payment was. So essentially what that payment is your water utility has assets in the city that are essentially tax exempt, where they don't receive a property tax bill for the valuation of that equipment. Wisconsin PSC kind of came back and realized, well, that infrastructure is critical for fire protection and other servicing the municipality. So what they propose, gosh, I don't remember how old it is, but coming up with a way for the general fund to quote unquote tax the water utility, because they're not getting taxed like a private business. So what happens is that it generates this payment in lieu of tax calculation. Now, what I noticed in the 2022 actual is this number you had budgeted. Again, we're gonna go all the way back to 2022 and move forward. You budgeted 200,000 for that in 2022. Your actual in 22 was approximately 136,000. There's one other number that's calculated combined in this summary. Again, in the 2023 budget, you budgeted 219,700. As you can see, I'm estimating you won't make that payment, because that, as your assessment ratio gets less, that payment or anticipated average of that estimated 200,000 gets less and less. And if you add significant assets, like let's say you add, significant mains, or significant hydrants, you could expect that number to go up. I plan on providing Tony and Nicole some calculation spreadsheets so they can better estimate that number on an annual basis and provide both to the wastewater and water commission and this board, because they have to marry each other. What's being transferred out of the water fund has to agree to what's being transferred into the general fund. The next is a positive on revenue. We're seeing a 21% increase in intergovernmental revenues. That's largely, as I had mentioned in the memo, impact of Act 12. For that additional supplemental aid to the tune, the actual number is 199,247. I had mentioned 200,000 estimate rounded. So that was a positive for the community. In the local government space, there is still significant push to get additional resource funding for EMS services, for fire services, as well as seeing what they can do to continue to improve the shared revenue. A couple conferences that I recommended Tony go to, will keep him informed so he can bring those legislation updates to this council. The fines and forfeitures we have going down, estimated 5%. Really that number due to the overall dollar impact was, based off of Sickage's analysis. So it was a 5%, decrease. Tony will continue to track that number. And, if we can come back to this board mid-year with a positive update that we feel like we'll exceed that number, that's great news. But again, I always caution overestimating revenues. Public charges for service or a 14% increase, that's largely as a result of your ambulance run revenue increasing. Now, that's a combination of things, and I haven't done an extreme detail dive into it, but there's an increase in the federal Medicare reimbursement rate. You may or may not have started to see some benefit of that, as well as you continue to see increased run revenue for a number of runs. I encourage, if there's additional inquiry specifically on that ambulance run revenue we can get those answers for you with working with your EMS staff. The next line is a negative 29%. However, that's a little misleading because when you're starting with $2,800 and you go down to $125, that percentage looks a lot larger than the actual impact. Again, that for the intergovernmental charges for service, or essentially when you as a government charge yourself to do something or charge certain departments, that is, it can vary, and ultimately I don't see widely used at many municipalities. So that dollar amount is kind of consistent with my expectations. Miscellaneous revenues. Now, I do want to put some caution on this just because there was recent information on the Federal Reserve cutting rates approximately 4 times in 2023. So what you will notice is I'm estimating the miscellaneous revenue being 258,000. That is largely due to unprecedented interest income earnings on the cash that you guys have in your various bank accounts that are open. I caution you because even in 2022 and 2021, you were probably looking closer to 50 or 70,000. I anticipate you being almost 190,000 this year on interest income. And that's money that if all of a sudden you were getting half of the interest earnings and you guys were counting on that to balance the budget, that we want to be somewhat conservative in that figure. Again, if we can come back as that being positive and mid-year updates saying, hey, we anticipate interest income to exceed our expectations, then you can realign and potentially change the overall priority. Any question on revenue before I jump into expenditures? And again, we'll go through, the general fund is the only fund we'll go specifically line by line, and then we'll just go fund by fund, and I'll ask if you guys have any questions. Well, should have warned you guys I like to talk.
I'll talk in the next category.
So in the expenditures, this is a number where, again, you start with a smaller denominator, that percentage is gonna look a little bit larger. In addition, as mentioned in the cover memo, we had proposed adding an administrator position in the 2024 budget cycle. So that is largely due to the increase in that percentage. In addition, the finance committee with support of council have invested in Tony's education. So some of my time in there, some of other services to ensure we build proper budgeting and reporting cycles out, so you guys are getting more timely updates. Public safety, now, this is actually a relatively small figure for public safety increases. Fire services, EMS, and police continue to be the by far largest increase in municipal budgets. There's a couple reasons for that. One being, WRS has higher contribution percentages on public safety wages. Again, the reason why that's the case, or their actuarially determined calculation, is they estimate that, you know, police or public safety employees have a shorter career, so they estimate their actual years having to work to receive the full benefit being less. Therefore, the employee per side is higher on the retirement. And again, those rates are set by ETF to make sure that the fund, that the future pension benefits are completely funded. So we run at a completely different system than much of the, sorry, Tony, municipalities and local governments in Illinois, where there are a whole bunch of individual employee pension funds. The state of Wisconsin collectively got together and said, well, we can better cover ourselves for risk if we get together and pool our resources to help maintain in the ebbs and flows of the economy. In addition, historically, health insurance costs have been significantly higher for public safety employees, not necessarily because of the rate being any different than other employees, but most union agreements dictate a higher percentage contribution that the city or municipality is required to cover. So kind of when we were talking about the increased run, so if you're going on more calls, going on more runs, you're likely also going to be incurring more maintenance time, more obviously hours to service those calls. So that is another reason why that public safety percentage also has increased since last year. Public works, I think this is most reflective of, you know, the cost of salt. Public works departments and parks departments are most directly impacted by inflation because they're the two departments that are most often buying consumables, salt, cold patch, you know, swing set repair materials, depending if you have like an aquatic facility. You have those kind of things. Now, the aquatic center is a little bit different in this situation because it's actually funded through the tag center and not represented here. But largely, the public works budget was driven by increases in maintenance costs and overall salt increasing, et cetera. Next category is one of the items that once we get into the detailed portion of the budget, I just want this council to just maybe take a second and reconsider. I think one, seeing what this dollar amount was used for and potentially adding it back. So you do see an 82% decrease in this funding category. Again, when we go through the budget, and I'll point it out very specifically, I want to make sure that this council has one more opportunity to consider adding that back.
Can you explain, because we have people here, what that's used for?
Yep, so that was a question that I had, and as we got there, I was actually gonna pull up that information on my computer so I could see what that has historically been paid to. So if you went, I'll, when I get to that page, so I don't have to, I'll make sure that I very clearly communicate what that item is used for. Culture, recreation, and education. Saw a 25% increase. A vast majority of that increase. So what's included, and I guess for those who maybe don't speak governmental accounting, the state requires us to use certain categories. So municipalities can be compared from one municipality to the next. So there's a basis of comparability. Wisconsin DOR also does put a resource out there, and it lists out how your chart of account should be set up. So you may look in the budget, any general government expenditure should have a expenditure budget of 5.1, and then whatever the remaining code is. So for culture, rec, and education, how that impacts Mayville is the library is under there, parks is under there. There's obviously more than those, but those are the two biggest categories that fall under there. So obviously with the building of the new library, there's obviously anticipated increase in costs, operating costs. When I look, and we can talk about that more when we get to the detailed budget, specific to the library fund, sorry, not the library fund, the library portion that's in the general fund. I just noted it was a 33% increase in the overall appropriation. That was largely due to needing to contract for cleaning services for that facility. I think that was about 36,000. But again, we can touch on that when we get to that portion of the budget. Contingency, it is extremely odd if you don't have a balanced budget to use what's called contingency, because essentially, what I see municipalities when they have a balanced budget, that will factor in 20,000, 25,000, 100,000 and still balance. So if you have an unbalanced budget like 2023, and still budgeted for 127,000, that essentially just meant that, okay, we want a budget to spend down fund balance even further, but we don't know what that's going to be on. It's much more appropriate to come to a council meeting with a budget amendment saying, I want to do X and it's going to cost X dollars, and introduce a formal budget amendment. That is why you do not see a formal contingency line item here. And I know there's questions that there may be questions on that, and we'll wait till we get to that final page specific to contingency. So as I mentioned before, $180,000 deficit projected in 2024. Again, reiterating that that's okay, but to look forward for solutions in the 2025 budget and forward. I do estimate that you will meet your 25% fund balance, maintenance of fund balance by the end of 2024. The bottom part of this page, you'll kind of see a breakdown of levy by fund. The largest portion, obviously, with the most activity happening in your municipality is the general fund. You do have some contributions related to the tag center. Debt service fund is the fund that's required. Once you take out debt, that money's got to get paid back. So instead of each fund paying that portion of the debt service, governmental accounting says, no, it's okay. Your enterprise funds can pay that money back, and then your debt service fund can pay it all back in one fund. And so that's where that levy is. That's where that amount is levied. And then consistent on landfill recycling and CDA for numbers in the prior year. And those are also included later in the packet. As I mentioned before, you're seeing a 91.19% assessment ratio, or 5.77% per 100,000. A lot of information, so I'll take maybe some high-level questions on the expenditure categories before getting into the general fund. Okay. Hearing none, no questions so far. There'll obviously be some more opportunity to speak here yet on the detailed line item. I'll move forward to, again, the general fund is the only fund that we will go through line, kind of quote unquote, line by line at a very high level. So we'll go one page at a time. So the first page listed, you have taxes, intergovernmental revenue, license and permits. I'll open it up to or I'll point out a couple things, and then I'll open it up for questions specifically that's listed out here. Again, the payment in lieu of taxes is a more accurate reflection of what I anticipate or estimate that you'll actually be able to collect. Your supplemental municipal aid revenue is $199,247. Your street, state transportation and highway aids, we did receive communication that the state had sent out an error last week. However, I was conservative in these figures and have not increased it for what the potential 2024 increases. But your 2023 estimate was what you actually received or will receive by the end of the year. It is untypical that balance ever goes down. So again, not knowing that DOT had communicated that there were changes, we went the conservative route as presented in this budget. And that's last for any high level talk or any my comments, any other comments on this page or questions on this page specifically. For these pages, I will look for some indication from council alderman to make sure that you're ready to move on. So when you're ready, if you want to look up, I'll know that you're ready to move on to the next section.
When we get to the comptroller, I have a question.
Yep, well,
Okay.
the comptroller expenditure or revenue.
I just wanted to see if, do you have to be bonded yet?
So it depends on your insurance carrier. And there's a lot of discussion in municipalities about whether that's officially required. Most insurance carriers understanding that Tony will deal with, especially this time of year, a large amount of cash, include that in your policy. What I would recommend doing is a review of the insurance policy to ensure that's not, that is included. If it's not included, I would recommend that Tony does get bonded. It's highly recommended that the person that's handling the cash or ultimately responsible is bonded. Because again, you're potentially taking, about $2.2 million of debt. If Tony wanted to take that $2.2 million and run, that would be protecting you in that
Yeah,
instance.
that's not even the field I'm in. I'm just thinking that, because of everything that happened in the past. I just wanted to make sure, this has been brought up before,
Sure.
but I never got an answer back, whether it was included with our insurance carrier or not. I think you remember me bringing that up one other time, right, Tony?
Could I get you an answer by the, this December 27th meeting?
Sure.
We'll take some time to review that. All right, hearing no other questions on the first page of revenue, we'll go on the second page of revenue. Again, the only thing of note on here is the ambulance fee run revenue. Everything else is relatively status quo. Again, I'll cue to you guys to look up when you're ready. Any comments on that page? I don't wanna rush it. Okay. On the next, or I should say the last page of revenues, the one thing I will note is the very first item, it's at the comptroller interest. I'm estimating that you'll have 187,580 of revenue by the end of this year. No, I'm only recommending budgeting 75,000 due to the potential risk of rates being cut and you ultimately relying on that interest to cover an operation. So again, that's a much more conservative number. In addition, if you would jack that number up to 150,000 and in 2025 rates we would absolutely know rates would go down. Well, that's additional money. Now you have to find other places in the budget to cut. So again, being very conservative on the revenue side. All right, looks like everyone's through their revenues. The next page is expenditures. So starting with the city council, mayor and city attorney. As you can see, the recommended budgets are the 2023 amounts. In all instances, I would agree that those are appropriate dollar amounts. Any questions on those three categories? The next category is a much bigger category that I anticipate there being maybe a little bit of additional discussion. All right, looks like we'll move on. Kind of a little segue here. As I had mentioned, your account strings have meaning. So your first number in your account string, as they're listed here, are the general fund or 10. The next 5 digits is the specific category. So the next category we're talking about is general admin, or that 51420 comes from that Wisconsin DOR guide on how to label your account. The next account is a department. So your 04 is your truly your general admin. And then the next segment in your account string is what's called your object level. So you should see some consistency from department to department. Retirement in one department will have 203 as that object code. So where that becomes important as we develop reports for department heads, we can key in on, let's say, the fire department being 22 in the middle of that and make sure that they are getting the codes, or you guys are getting the codes to appropriately analyze the entire budget, not just the general fund, with relatively ease. So the general admin portion of the budget had the most significant change from 2023. Through the finance committee, they recommended adding the administrative position at $100,000 and doubling the associated benefits that had been budgeted or that had been estimated by sickage in initial spreadsheets. In addition, you'll see the professional service line item here is 20,000. The big increase, the reason for the increase on there is the funds associated for the recruitment for PAA to come in and provide job postings for the administrator and clerk position. Ultimately, if the administrator position does not move forward, I would not anticipate those expenditures to occur. Any questions on general admin?
What were the professional services for again?
So the professional services, in the general admin in this specific line, the biggest reason for the increase was the 15,000. You give me 1 second, I can take a look at what the other professional services that go through that line. It looks like there's some, wise guy IT services, so big IT related purchases, looks like are going through there. Some general code, invoices going through there if you have to ratify ordinances.
Okay,
Did that answer that question?
yes, don't let me forget about the laptops.
Oh, I won't. Any other, so for those on the finance committee, when I reviewed those meetings, I know there was a fair amount of discussion on the contributions to both the Main Street chamber, city events, and education. I just want to make sure that this is appropriate. Again, from what I picked up on for feedback on the budget, these are the numbers that were recommended. But again, just want to make sure there's a second set of eyes on this.
Yes.
I'm just noticing, building maintenance. There's no spend through 2023. That's all right.
So this is a situation where, especially during turnover and somebody having a true understanding of the entire budget, these funds were likely set aside to do something, but nobody essentially knew or gave guidance on. So yes, I mean, if there is some funds available to do some maintenance yet this year, I estimated at 0 because there weren't any planned maintenance of this facility. I guess I will comment, and it was brought up at a finance committee meeting, and there's a couple other places in the budget. There were $0 amounts added in some of these, what I would call kind of employee related items. So, employee travel, typically what I see budgeted there is if, there either people have to go to a conference or they have to, for example, go pick up the tax bills from Dodge County. That's, for example, a reimbursable expense. So, that's where, typically those items are budgeted. Membership dues. So if we're talking about an administrator, we're probably talking about somebody who has membership fees to WICMA, or even ICMA. While those aren't included in the budget, this existing budget, we can certainly add a dollar amount back in there, or once that position is filled, we can come back with a detailed training budget and say, we think this would be a value add, and either take it from another bucket where we anticipate expenditures to be lower. But I did want to make this council aware of $0 amounts that were previously presented to you.
I remember, I thought we discussed in The dollar amount for travel, when we were going through it, maybe we did not.
And I know a lot of members here are new. Typically, when I see budget proceedings happening, at the end, a formal motion or summary of motion is made at the end of the meeting with all the recommended changes. That does really help out both the clerk and the members to understand the totality of all the changes made. Throughout my listening of those meetings, they were sporadically through the meetings. So just a recommendation going forward that sometimes at the end of these discussions, they're better to summarize all the changes in totality instead of individually throughout the meeting.
If the travel is reimbursed, don't you give a certain amount per mile?
Yep.
Turn it in monthly.
And typically, so what I see often done is actually turned in like with that current payroll. So right now, the IRS mileage reimbursement is 65.5 cents per mile. So yes, you would submit that in this case, give it to Christine to submit her mileage for the travel. What that also would include too is like if somebody had to get like a hotel, like a training was maybe in Stevens Point, for example. Obviously, you're not going to expect that employee to drive back and forth because the mileage is going to exceed what you're paying for just allowing them to stay. So various things to consider. Ultimately, my recommendation, likely with where the budget is once if you continue to go forward with the administrator, once that position's in place, that person really identifies and tell you what their need is and say, okay, this is what's budgeted and this is what was planned, but this is what I think will be beneficial to the organization. Because very likely at the degree of somebody that you're hiring, they may identify portions of the budget where they want to have additional conversations and saying, hey, I think we can save costs here, or I think these are where our funds can be utilized better. But it really takes somebody getting intimately involved with Tony to get an understanding of every line by line item. So what I caution on haphazardly coming up with dollar amounts without having a detailed training budget or a detailed travel budget is it's truly at this point an estimate and ultimately a process that we want to build into the 2025 budget cycle, where every department is building out a training budget, including, okay, does it include travel? How many conferences are? What are the dollar amounts? What are the fees? So if it costs me $150 to be part of Wisconsin GFOA every year, I'm inventorying that and turning it in to either Tony or the facilitator of the process. And that way you can say, okay, of the $300, these are the exact dollar amounts that go into it. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Again, ultimately, this is your decision. So if you would like any dollar amount added back, I can certainly note that.
I don't see a need.
Similarly, I think, so the next page, if we look at it, it's on election and data processing. So, I did take a look at the data processing account. That's another IT line item as well. So that is larger, a little bit larger this year with some necessary investments, to staff computers and various equipment. The elections, based off of the conversations, and again, through, I think their elections were discussed at 3 various, special, finance committee meetings. I think it's appropriate at this time, again, when you have a clerk get hired, it may be appropriate for them to say, okay, this is what it was after the April election. This is what I forecast my cost to be at the remaining of the year. You'll ultimately probably find that this dollar amount's correct. But one of the things that somebody who doesn't have this knowledge is, okay, well, if you have X amount of Badger books, it costs $150 for annual licensing. And somebody who works in that every day knows that, but kind of estimating it based off of prior year numbers, it becomes challenging. What I do see in presidential election years is instead of looking at the prior couple years, you go back to the most recent presidential election year, 2020, And then you look at what inflation has been in between then and index it forward. Again, a full-time clerk would help you through that process and identify something like, you guys may be aware that the changes to the absentee envelopes. So that's an additional cost. Now the state WEC has a bucket of money that you can apply for to get some of that cost. I promise you, it's not gonna cover the total cost of the envelopes. But it will significantly reduce the overall cost. Any questions on the election or data processing? Okay. All right, I believe, Kim, on this next section, you had a question on the comptroller. I believe it was specific to bonding. As a reminder, I have a note to bring you a solution by December 27th. Just a couple notes in here. The audit and accounting or accounting and audit line item, it's specific to Baker Tilly's time for auditing your independent financial statements. Every municipality is required to go through an annual audit. And truthfully, basically, you have a small portion of federal funds or state funds you get, it automatically trips you to have to do it. You issue debt, well, guess what? You're automatically issuing financial statements. So I get questions very often saying, well, why do we need an audit? That's like the answer. You either have a certain level of state or federal funding, or you issue debt. And truthfully, it is good. You know, your credit rating would tank if for some reason you decided not to do an audit one year or had no intentions on doing it and had to do it, late. The other thing I'll comment in this budget is some of my time for assisting Tony and kind of in improving controls is in here. The one other item that's not in the comptroller budget, but that was is the assessment line. This number was added back during one of the special finance committee meetings. Initially, you had $0 budgeted. What this line item represents is your contract with Associated Appraisal. They do have monthly maintenance records that they have to keep in track of. So not only every so often do you have to do revaluations, this provider monthly goes in and makes sure, was there home sales, following up and making sure that the records are most appropriately accurate. Okay, where are their permits pulled? Okay, now I need to pull that property and assess it, that their assessment is at the level it needs to be. And so typically this number is extremely fixed, where you'll have a contract where it will either go up 1% to 3% a year. This is a very good contract dollar amount for the size of your municipality. The reason why I say that is it might be a good idea to pull that contract and see when it expires, because very likely the next time that contract comes up, you may see even doubling of that cost. So I just want to put that out there. Any questions on comptroller or assessment? Or assessor? Hearing none, I'm gonna jump down to the next page, which is risk and property management in City Hall. Risk and property management simply is your premiums that are due to be insured. Those every year typically we see increases. I did not have an increased dollar amount in here because this is what was proposed, or there was not amount proposed in the sickage budget. But I knew you'd have these costs, so I put at least last year's dollar amount in here. You likely will be around that 123,500. Probably could be up to 130,000. what I typically see is the increase, so as we mentioned before, with the increase in equalized value, well, homes are insured not based off of assessed value or equalized value, and similarly, the village property, or sorry, that's habit, the city's property is also insured at replacement cost. So obviously, if the cost of replacement goes up, your premiums are gonna go up. So that's the biggest category I have at least seen in my budget. Additionally, workers' comp has what's called a modifier. So the less you use the insurance, the better the modifier is. I don't know what your modifier exactly is. I can tell you where I come from, our modifier is 88 or 0.88, meaning we have a premium, but we actually get almost a 12% discount because we're not utilizing, or we're not having to pay out workers' comp claims. We're avoiding injuries. We have good procedures in place. Now inevitably, workers' comp claims are gonna happen, so it's not like you wanna shush those away by any means, but that modifier is really important. So if you have a big change in that modifier, so you go even from a 1 to a 1.25, I've seen it as large as 1.6. That means essentially you're paying 160% of the base premium. That can radically change that number as well. And I had no significant changes for this, or no significant comments on the city hall portion.
So Cameron, you're saying we're conservative on property management or right in there where we should be?
For the risk and property management, I ultimately don't have the authority to present something here that's different than what was presented to you previously. You could increase that dollar amount. I think what maybe a better approach is we use the amount that was budgeted last year, and when Tony and I do some additional digging, if it's significantly more, like 5 or 10% different from what's budgeted, we come back and provide an update and just mention, hey, please expect that this will be a little bit higher. Now, what being conservative in the revenues, you're likely gonna get higher interest income. So this is kind of something where like, okay, yeah, we were a little bit less in this category, but we're probably gonna be a little bit more on the interest income side of things. So these are the kind of things that somewhat balance out, but we wanna make sure we're bringing back updates to this council so you understand on a monthly basis if there's any significant changes. Typically, these insurances are billed quarterly. So you likely are gonna see, January, February, March is gonna be the same dollar amount. And then all of a sudden in April, you'll see it jump to twice that value. And then again, the next quarter iteration. There may be an opportunity. Some insurance companies will give you a better rate, similar to if you do your own insurance, if you pay it annually, it may be cheaper. Again, those are all things that we can work with Tony and see what our various options. I will say your current insurance provider is one that barely any local Wisconsin municipalities use. So one of the things to consider is some insurance carriers like the League of Wisconsin Municipalities and CIVMIC. Not only are they offering insurance services, they also offer a lot of free benefits, such as either training, safety grants, etc. So when I was talking about that workers' comp modifier, there's a lot of things that some of these other insurance companies do to help train, to help get good procedures in place that could ultimately make these numbers better. So just something to consider, kind of going forward. I did know, as I mentioned, that your insurance carrier isn't a common one for local municipalities.
Something to check into, huh?
Yep, we got a list.
Right, good.
All right, so one of the largest budget categories, the police department. A modest or small-ish or modest increase from last year. No, nothing of note on here from what was presented. A lot of these increases are inflationary. I can tell already that your police department does an incredible job of maintaining costs. To see an increase of only this amount just speaks to their budget management and what they are able to do with the resources that they're given. Yeah. Any questions on police? that doesn't take away, and that's not taking away at other departments, it's just specifically on this one.
Health insurance went up quite a bit, huh?
Yeah, so kind of similar to the city of Mayville, so the city utilizes the Wisconsin health insurance. Again, has been historically very great rates compared to going out and negotiating with health insurance providers separately. Similar to the city, they have relied heavily on the use of reserves over the last 2 years. This past year, they finally said, we can't do this anymore. So depending on where you are in the state and what plan, I've seen as high as 26% increases in plan costs. As I mentioned earlier, why I'm not versed in your union agreement, certain union agreements dictate higher percentage of contributions of health insurance, which, you know, would in proportionately affect this budget or any other union budgets compared to general employees. And as I mentioned too, the retire, so the WRS increase for general employees was 0.1%. Depending on what category, with or without Social Security, almost all saw a full percent increase. So that's essentially like giving somebody a 1% raise, but having to account for that in retirement. Now, that's not how it works. They're not actually getting that additional funds, but essentially it's a 1% less of buying power that you have just because the rates had to increase.
Okay.
I might lose my voice tonight. That's a good thing. You guys are getting informed. Let's go to the fire department, and this is gonna be, I kind of have it open on 2 pages, the fire department and fire inspection. Again, this department runs on an extremely slim and minimum budget. I just want to make you aware, when I kind of look at budgets, it's one, you kind of got to take a step back and look at your municipality, but then also look at budgets from other municipalities and see where are you in line with municipalities in your size. Okay, you know, fire departments, there's no one fire department's the same, but you could find other examples for relatively same number of calls, and just making sure that using that as a benchmark to say, okay, well, if they need this much, what are we not doing? What are we not proactively managing? What are we not proactively assisting maintenance on? Et cetera. I did see, and I don't know what the turnaround time, as I mentioned, you have in your budget a ladder truck replacement. As I looked at this and what was presented, my only question I had initially when looking at it was the fire department going to see any corresponding decrease in anticipated maintenance? I'm not sure if this council had got an answer on that. And I assume that it was built into this budget model, but that would be important to know. If they're spending $20,000 an hour or $20,000 in maintenance annually, well, obviously if they get a newer truck, they might not see the same dollar. So initially, that's my kind of question when I'm saying asset replacement.
Joe,
I would anticipate it would be reduced. I mean, this thing, vehicle's almost 40 years old. I know I did have a conversation with,
Red.
yeah, with the chief, and there is potential that we can also sell the vehicle to another municipality, a smaller municipality. I don't remember what the dollar amount he thought he could get was, but I know that he does anticipate that we'll be able to sell it in that, you know, without recover some small amount of money.
Yeah, and what I recommend, and typically, you know, if I'm working, if a department sells a significant asset and they're able to get $15,000-$20,000, my next question to that department is there anything that's been on the replacement list that we need to adjust? Like, do they need a specific piece of equipment. We had money that we weren't budgeting or planning on. Let's, instead of just putting this money back to the general pot, let's utilize this money to put back into the department. Just something to consider, in those instances. Thank you. The next section of the budget, it's a full page is the ambulance service for $643,000. Again, we're seeing, quite a bit increase in this category. However, based off of your run revenue isn't out of the ordinary for increases. So open to this council for questions. We are getting in the home stretch of the general fund. After that, it will go much quicker.
What is all included in the contracted services? Because it looks like it wasn't budgeted for all last year.
Let me take a look. Sure. Looks like Andre's Medical Billing LTD.
What are they called again?
Andre's Medical Billing LTD.
Our billing service,
Say that again?
probably that billing service.
Yep.
And, intercept fees were, we can ask about that or no? That's right above it.
Oh,
Yeah, I like it.
I'll look at that as well. It looks like I'm seeing various costs. So, for example, City of Fond du Lac, West Bend Fire Department, Western Lake Fire Department, Lake Town Fire Department, again, another Western Lakes Fire Department. They're consistent dollar amounts. So it looks like they're either $300 or $350 unit charges. Intercept fees. Without having a
Ambulance to ambulance.
Yep, so that's likely what you're getting charged from the other municipality for that transfer service. Tried to do as much research and catching up since
Right.
November 17th, but there are some answers that I don't 100% have answers for, but I'll do my best. And would you like additional information for the December 27th meeting on the contracted services of 34,000? Are you good? Okay, I just wanted to make sure that nobody had outstanding questions on that. Okay, on the next page, we have a couple more sections, zoning, flood control and dams. No, nothing. I guess one thing of note, I'm thinking, or one of the questions I initially had when I saw this for engineering services, because this wasn't budgeted, and I don't know if this was a specific project for 2023, but that may be miscoded. That may actually need to be coded to There's a Director of Public Works contracted service line budgeted for 60,000, and there's currently only 14,827. I'm imagining that's where it should go. And so with where I'm at in my review and helping Tony, there may be things that might not be in the perfect spot. That's a blatant obvious one, that we need to look into, but that's something that could, once it's actually fully reconciled, I could see that actually going there.
Right, so red flag that one.
I will provide an update for your December 27th meeting on that.
Thank you.
Under the contracted services under dams too. It's significantly higher than what we had historically, or at least over the last year, so I'm curious why that's so high.
I think we had a problem at one point that it had to be fixed.
I understand that, but we spent 400, we're projecting $400 for this year, we're budgeting 5,000 for next year.
It's a Jack question. I recall some, discussion about the dam, that some work needs to be done too, but I don't know the details.
And it must have been before we were here, I don't remember that, you?
It was before, yeah, it was. What was it, last spring, maybe even later, further back, I mean.
I have a note here to get some additional information on the December 27th meeting, just to get clarity on what exactly that is.
Sure.
All right, the next set of pages, covers emergency government, fire and police commission. Right now, again, because this is the way that it was presented in the sickage budget, I see municipalities go back and forth on this. Typically, those commissions only have to meet if something of note happens. So I conservatively, I do see some municipalities put budget items in there. If they haven't had to use it in 10 years, you know, other municipalities may budget for that in like a contingent, overall contingency for the entire budget. Ultimately, my professional recommendation would be for 2024 to leave this as is, but something to consider adding back in 2025. Please let me know if anybody has thoughts.
Does this have anything to do with our police department as well?
Yep, so it's your, and this is one, I'm a little bit more, so like if there was like a replacement, we have our police department here. Right?
Yeah.
You
Wake
guys-
up over there, guys.
These are emergency.
Oh, okay, never mind. So typically this is only when something happens, like a disciplinary action that can't get resolved through like the department, and it has to go to a formal like commission for formal action. Each municipality is set up a little bit different, and the requirement of those commissions are set up a little bit different depending on your governing structure. So before explaining exactly how your structure is, I would want to make sure I'm quoting it correctly.
Ryan, there's a couple of things that go under emergency government, doesn't it?
As far as what?
Well, let's see, how about the sirens?
Yep.
How about, gosh, I don't know the technical terms, but your correspondence with talking out with counties or Dodge County. I don't know the details, but is that where this, Office of Emergency Government comes in?
All of the maintenance and, parts of that is for the. All the cost in there is either the cost for myself or deputy emergency management director and the maintenance for the alternative assignments. That's the total cost for all. of
Okay.
this stuff. Right.
So is there a question as to whether there should be regarding the police and fire commission, whether those should be left at zero for the year?
I think that my general comment is, I see it done differently at different municipalities. My overall question, or what I would propose, given where we were at in the budget cycle and the minimum nature of the costs that go through this fund, would be leaving it at zero, but something we should reconsider in the 2020 by budget. What I potentially sometimes use is like 10-year look back analysis to see what's the average for the 10 years and estimate and have that in the budget amount. Ultimately, for my budget, I love seeing zeros in this because that means that there aren't any issues happening. Not to say that given these small dollar amounts that there were, but. As I kind of mentioned in the zoning category for engineering services, I believe likely that this or that is right now currently charged to the incorrect account. Provided an update on December 27th, to Tony to communicate. So currently that Director of Public Works line item is a little skinny. With the estimated actual, I've overheard some discussion in general on engineering services. I don't know if that's particular to this line item through my various listening into your meetings. But it is ultimately the same dollar amount as last year, based off of even your actuals at being 13. Plus. You're really at that line likely at 51,077, so that 60,000 is likely still going to be appropriate for that line. All right. Moving on, we got the streets and roads, very big budget category that actually takes up a page in a little bit. I had nothing to note in that category to mention. Similar, since we already are looking at the first page of the second, I have nothing else to note on the street lighting or storm sewer.
One quick question on streets and roads, sick leave is doubled. Significantly higher than the estimated 2023 total.
You said sick.
Sick leave, yeah.
So I can't mention specific names, but what was considered in that line was an additional employee of a potential retiree and an estimated dollar amount. So for sick leave, that was $30,000 that was factored.
Yeah,
And
we paid,
and the other one was 15K.
and we are anticipating a retirement in 24, so that's probably why that's.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the.
Yeah.
Good question though. I've also kind of, while we're talking about that, this is a very unique budget structure on having sick, vacation, holidays broken out from wages and salaries. Typically, for ease of accounting too, if I have a full-time employee, I account for 2,080 hours of compensation, either under wages or salary, regardless if they use holiday time or sick time, it's still wages. So for my own sanity, I keep it under one line, and that way you know you've accounted for the full balance. I think sometimes having those separate categories like this can lead to confusion. Now you can have a true payout line, which is anytime that there's there that it's for a retirement specific example, but I do agree that your overall payroll accounts are probably more accounts than you actually need. So ultimately, I can work with Tony on providing a recommendation of a possible roll-up. However, I do think it would be important to work with every department to make sure that they're not, for some reason, utilizing that from an operational purposes. But I, as a finance director, don't view any benefit of having those separate categories. Because again, it's not like you're compensating somebody more than the 80 hours or union if it's slightly less. So oftentimes this results in, when you're reconciling what's in your payroll, in your various funds to the employees, you can come the more lines you have, the more opportunity you have for error. So just wanted to put that out there for consideration here in the future. It did look like road maintenance was up to, from 58,000 to 85. Or vehicle maintenance, I'm sorry. Any other
Why
questions?
is that? Why is that so high?
So I heard, a couple things, the overall, and this is from my notes from the various meetings, specifically from DPW with your aging fleets. It's more expensive. Obviously, the older vehicles get, the more expensive they are to replace. Ultimately, what my follow-up question back to that department would be, well, what does the 180,000 investment in the new front loader mean for your maintenance budget? So hopefully if that replacement comes earlier in the year, maybe you have an opportunity to save some money on maintenance costs there.
Yeah, and that leads me to a question. So I was speaking to Jack about the front loader this morning from timing. So he wants to move forward and getting that front loader just after the new year.
Sure.
Which doesn't necessarily coincide with us doing the bond issuance with Allers.
So typically what you do is if you're issuing tax exempt financing, there's likely somebody here at the city and it's a procedure that we formally can go through at a future budget meeting. You have to issue an intent to reimburse. So essentially you're saying we plan to reimburse ourselves through tax. You have to specify the specific fund, the dollar amount, and the anticipated expenditure paid, but more than appropriate, like I would say 25% of my capital budget, just what the lead times are that we're hiring for. We give authorization to our departments to order, and we document and then fill out those intent to reimburse, just to make sure you're not ordering in April or May when this financing may actually occur.
Yeah, okay, good, thanks.
All right, next page is sidewalks and crosswalks, weed controls, tree brush, snow and ice.
Okay, so regarding salt, since we touched on that, the budgeted increase is pretty small and less than our anticipated cost for this year.
Yeah, I'm looking at like a 6.4% increase year over year from the budgeted percent.
Additionally, the sand gravel is far beyond what was budgeted for.
All the supplies and gravel. Well, let's see if we can get that real quick. Looks like there was an order on. Okay, so you may have. So. We gotta look at this in two categories, based off of the timing of when this was purchased. I see that this was purchased, the one thing that's in there, which is, the 15,282. Has a purchase date of January 17th. Likely what that department may have, you can't account for expenditure based off of when it was quote unquote budgeted. So while that department might have been like, okay, well, I have some remaining 2022 funds to use, I'm gonna place this order. Well, if you ultimately didn't get the supplies till 2023, it doesn't matter what budget year you say it's for, it has to be accounted for. I'm assuming that's what it is, but I'll get you a follow-up answer on that. And again, I don't know what the public works policy is on the use of sand compared to salt. I do know there's a lot of negativity about how salt is necessarily being used and trying to utilize sand more often. This could have also been a case at the end of 2022 where maybe you guys weren't even able to get salt. So this was the we need to put something on our roads to make sure people are protected. True. These are all great questions.
I don't think we ran into that problem though.
Yep, and so what I kind of was just essentially speculating what could have been some of the option, but I will ultimately get some additional information for this body. Additionally, Joe, while that amount is at 100 and I would recommend moving forward with that, I do think it would be important to see what you guys are contracted to receiving along with the purchase price per ton. That information you are very likely already in contract for, so we can easily produce that. Some more complex models, there's some 5-year look back and averaging number of snowfalls to come up with an estimated amount as well that we can certainly look at implementing in 2025. I'm going to use the term we, I'm going to feel like I'm part of the city right now.
Well, you basically are.
The next category is bridges, and then we jump into health and human service, animal control and contributions. This is that part of the budget where I said I would look at what that $16,000 we paid to, and ultimately there may need to be some consideration adding that back. While you guys look at the other numbers, I will take a look at this one. So that looks like the amount that was contributed to Graceland Cemetery. ASSN.
Yeah.
Is that an anticipated expenditure for 2024?
It is, that was the request specific for the cemetery.
That may have gotten a little bit goofed up because we did approve that, but it was all based on, it may have been allocated.
It was in parks. And
That's right.
Yeah, it was in parks.
It was in parks and it was like down 3/4 of the way.
Yeah,
Some coded into,
so it may have
but then we
just
had questions on.
ended up in the wrong location.
So based off the feedback here, I'm gonna add that $16,000 back
Correct.
Yeah.
to, and again, I'll have updated totals here when we get to the end of the budget, or the end of the general fund.
Yep, perfect.
So just so for you guys to know, that increases the health and human service total to 19,400. Increasing the contributions on account 10 54910470200 by the 16,000. Okay. Library, I don't think this should surprise anybody, but obviously the bigger library they have, the more expenditures that are needed to maintain. One thing I do want to point out is libraries are kind of complex by nature. You guys also have three funds that account for various library activities. Fund 10, a combination of two funds that make up your true library fund. That is
Something you went from.
uh, 73 and 79, which make up your true library, and then your county library fund is Fund 26. So kind of when we're looking about library holistically, you gotta keep the three funds. Now, by state statutes, again, libraries are very, very unique in the sense that once you appropriate the money in the general fund, which is the only funds that are coming directly from the quote unquote city, the library board has kind of quasi judicial, or not judicial, but almost to the level of authority that the common council has to make decisions on those funds. Similarly, any assets accumulated, so if they have any endowments, they have sole control of those assets, where the common council cannot force a library board to make.
That's all by state statute.
What was that?
That's all by.
Yep, all by state statute. So I just wanna, because there may be been some rotation of this board, just understand that it's a very unique part of local government with the way library state statutes. At a high level, the history behind that is there was a fear that local governments, as they were gonna have budget deficits, were going to reallocate like either endowments or other things library had received to go specifically for library. So there was additional protection added in the legislation. But all good things. This book's good. Happy that for enrichment for the community. I will say this is a big, so for when you're talking about a departmental increase, this one was estimated to be a 33% increase. Again, a much bigger maintenance of the building. That makes sense. I mean, it's a new building, but accounting for the larger space, as well as the contracted services, that 36,000 was for cleaning services. I do want to point out that this along with reviewing the finance committee meetings, Tony helped me get this information from Jennifer. Just to make sure she provided it in one, so that also includes the library data processing, which is on the first line on the next page. Those two together are what Jennifer provided to the general fund. This is another one. I'm not really sure why the city ever broke these out into a different category. Budget cleanup next year, we could consider adding it up, because essentially if they look at it as all of one bucket of money, we could certainly put it back into that overall budget category.
So my only question on this is the budget for books.
So you're talking about what they've spent to date?
Well, yeah, I mean, budgeted last year was 7,200, spent year to date is like around 1,200, and then we've got 20,000 budgeted. That's a pretty significant increase.
Well, there's a little backstory behind that, and that the foundation is asking that the city start picking up the purchase of books, whereas in the past, they've contributed quite an amount each year for books.
The history.
That, something maybe at the upcoming meeting, we can get totals from them on the contributions in the previous few years, so that
Yeah, it's a good idea. The other thing, the cleaning fee. Was that the first number that they came with? Or, because I thought they were, I was talking with them that they were gonna look for an alternative.
That was the first number they came with.
I think that was the only number we.
That's all we came up with.
And I think,
Approximately like, whatever, how many, 40 hours a week. And
Yeah,
right, I think the conversation was partly that with the increase in size, staff isn't able to maintain the maintenance.
that was like a contracted
That was
price
a
too. that
contract.
She reached out to two different services that were right
Right, cause
right down the middle.
I think there was concern about hiring somebody full-time
Yeah.
and being able to have somebody reliable and
Right.
showing up, and then you're talking about benefits and all that other stuff.
yeah,
It's far off than you're gonna benefit from doing either part-time or contracted service. Once you're talking immediately, once you, pass the benefit threshold, your costs skyrocket because the cost of health insurance and while those are important benefits, contracting is likely gonna always be the cheaper way and more reliable way. They likely cover, if that person wanted to go on vacation, maternity, paternity leave, you're still getting that weekly service. I see very few municipalities, especially the city of Mayville, actually have cleaning staff. Cause likely what you can get from the scale of all the various city buildings, the contract that you can get out for somebody to come in and clean is pretty good. So just something else to consider, if you do have other actual paid positions for that, it is something you may want to consider, looking at, trying to contract for. And again, not advocating for cutting any positions.
No, but they did check into contracts, and from what I heard, they're extremely expensive. So another, way to go about this, maybe get a couple of part-times too, so, but if you can ask about that.
I think my conversation with Jennifer was that having a few part-time people has been, one, it's impossible to find people that want to do it on a part-time basis. And two, it's difficult to find people that are reliable at a part-time position like that. And so I think that was the reason that they were steering it in that direction, was for, if they have a part-time spot or they don't get anybody, now we've got weeks and months, and look at how long it's taken us to pick up a clerk. I mean, it can't go 3-4 months without a cleaning staff when you've got this building that's 5
Brand new.
times the size
Yeah.
that it was before,
Yeah,
I think that was part of the reason that it was steered in that direction.
and then you also want to take a step too. It's not only finding people, there's biweekly payroll for that person, is issuing W-2s. So it's every position you have, there is an overall admin. So one of the things that may not be looked is when you're talking about the contracted services, does that actually include like the supplies needed too? Because that means you'll also see, I see the line, while it's not significant, supplies, janitors, is, $600 on this budget, of course, which is significantly less than what the estimated is. You could, as part of your contract, they may be providing those supplies. Another thing too with libraries specifically and the demographics they serve, having a company come in and like appropriately clean, disinfect spaces that kids and stuff are gonna be around is just another thing to kind of consider. Cause you'd hate for somebody, to get sick or for some reason there was negligence on the city's part on addressing certain cleaning or maintenance needs on it and not brought to your attention, where a professional service company might get a little bit more coverage. Again, these are all great things to consider and good things to discuss. So I have in this section, just because we got a couple of things, we're gonna get some history about the level of contribution for folks. We're gonna do, because the maintenance did go up, just providing a little bit of kind of breakdown of what that exactly represents, and I'll get an update to you guys on this by the December 27th meeting. All right, home stretch for the general fund, and then we'll start flying. the senior citizen center, totaling 9,686. The historical society, again, consistent, maintaining that consistent contribution. Parks and parks. I did note a pretty substantial increase in for maintenance under building. I didn't hear through the various finance committee meetings what the rationale for that increase was.
Oh, would that be,
The roofs,
yeah, that's what I was saying, that'd be offset by the anticipated borrow for the roofs.
yeah, all buildings in town need roofs. New roofs.
Okay, so we want to make sure we're not budgeting for this in two places, because anything that's budgeted for, so right now we had a finance related project related to $80,000 for the park shelter building. If any amount of that is in that 55,000, we should take it out of this bucket. Because otherwise, essentially it's budgeted in two places.
That is part of it.
So how much should I be reducing that $55,500 total?
Hold it down last.
I would take
I thought he,
80,000.
I thought he asked for 40,000.
I thought it was 50 something, so here we are guessing.
It wasn't 50.
It wasn't?
No, I thought we doubled the total because the initial quote was several years old. It was 40 or 45. It wasn't 50. I don't have that with me, but I thought it was 40,000.
So that number would be 15,500 adjusted to the appropriate dollar
Does
amount.
that sound accurate? I thought because Ken, I think you were the one that mentioned that, possibly doubling it. Was that?
So we said when we, whatever he had for quotes,
Right.
and so it was like a year old.
It was multiple, I
Yeah,
believe.
2 or 3 years old.
Right. So did we say we double it?
We said we doubled, I think it was,
Okay, so then it was 40,000.
yeah. Pretty
So
sure.
then I would say you would wipe 40,000 from that number.
Okay.
I'm pretty confident that it was just a straight, we said double it.
And that's the finance projects that we talked about earlier.
Correct.
when We started.
But I think that 40,000 was included
In there.
probably in this number because that's where it originally was
Yeah,
placed.
that's right.
That's why, and that's why we're here tonight, making sure, that these
That wasn't part of our capital improvement, was it?
Yeah.
okay, that is fine.
Thank you. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I have that right here.
So the new total for the parks budget, in the general fund, went from 311,076 down to $271,076. So that, more than accounts for the increase of the 16,000, for the missing contribution earlier in the budget.
Yeah.
So we're right now net positive.
Good.
The, recreation, director, again, nothing, no changes there.
Changes.
And through the remaining budget, I will say, so on the last page of the general fund budget of the contingency, it's pretty rare for municipalities to actually book expenditures here. So one of the things Tony and I will need to do is we'll need to figure out where so it's typically what I see happen. So if we budget 127,000 for contingency, Tony would come and a contingency item came up. So in this instant, it was 72,660. What I oftentimes see is a budget amendment brought forward to the finance committee saying, we need, this came up, this is the need. We would like to subtract 72,662 from the contingency fund, and we would like to add that to X code, just to make sure it's appropriately in the category of the budget that it's represented.
Yep.
So you're not changing the overall budget dollar amount, you're just utilizing those reserves. Again, this becomes a moot point, but the amount budgeted for zero. I would never have an amount in the contingency line if you're already at a deficit, because essentially, if you're not, it's not truly a buffer.
Right.
So that is why that amount is recommended at zero. Just so with a couple of changes we made, the total loss or the updated loss for the general fund went from 180,314 down to 156,314. So again, we decreased the deficit.
Okay, does this come into play, what I talked to you about the other night, the 200 some $1,000 difference that the tag?
So that is, so great question. So the initial budget was from Sickage was relatively silent on how the levy was allocated. So what was in the public hearing notice was based off of the information at the time, what the recommendation of the overall levy would be. So the tag center being, we can kind of talk about that now. The tag center being the next fund that's on the list to talk about. With only needing $165,000 of support instead of $293,151, we allocated back additional levy to the general fund because the loss in the tag fund was not actually there. I want to remind, so if we look at the general fund and compare it to the tag fund, it's two different kind of funds completely. One is an enterprise fund, which is truly accounted for like a business. So when we think about things like depreciation expense, yes, it's an expense and you're recognizing portion of that asset over its useful life. It's not true cash outflow. So if you had $100, or let's just say $10,000 net income before depreciation, that's a good benchmark to be at. Ultimately, you wouldn't cash finance anything in the tag center for improvements. So you would ultimately don't need to replenish that depreciation bucket by budgeting for gain yearly, because that's essentially what you would be doing if you budgeted to have net income of zero. You would be budgeting to increase that cash in that fund to accommodate the purchase of future improvements, future assets. And I hope that makes sense. Again, I live in this every day, so it's English to me, but it could be completely different. The tag fund particularly with initially what had been proposed in the budget was significantly. So there was a lot of attention that was given to the tag fund and reviewing the budget, what was proposed. And so one of the conversations we had is about the foundation that provides, sometimes temporary, time to time capital assistance. It is my current understanding that they're not at this time interested in providing additional capital contributions. I welcome this body to reach out, it doesn't hurt to formally make a request, but the answer may just be no, we're no longer going to be funding. Similar with, if that's the same foundation that's doing the books, they might have gotten to a point where said, well, we've given the community so much over the years and we're kind of tapped out for the overall what we're willing to contribute. Now, what that does is there needs to be serious conversations about how the tag center is going to be sustainable over the next 5 to 10 years. One conversation Kim and I had was, well, attendance of being able to go there is deterring people to get membership, you know, where if it's often closed because there's not a lifeguard on site, well, maybe we need to look into options on how can we make sure and sustain the level of passes. Truthfully, what likely is gonna be the situation as you guys becoming more of a levy bind is we just may have to adjust the fees to make sure we're covering the cost of providing that service. And given having to make up $165,000, that could be potentially raising those fees almost double what they currently are. Now, I don't think that's the direction anybody here wants to go, but it's just something to consider. You know, ultimately, we want to make sure we can take care of this facility. We can make sure it doesn't dilapidate, as we said earlier. I think I got the word right.
Yeah.
So very important.
Say
to
that 3
consider.
times in a row.
I will massacre it.
But we do have another idea on the back burner, which will be coming up at the next meeting that
Sure.
will approach it another way. The waiver thing is not gonna work. It is a state thing.
Yep.
Against the law, so that's out the door. So plan B.
So with that said, kind of jumping back to the general fund, I think from my understanding, our initial conversations are done. The recommended, which we'll eventually get to at the end, will have a net loss of 156,000 in the general fund. I kind of want to do rapid fire because you do have 24 other funds, so we'll just do this fund at a time. So the tag center, I'm actually showing, and I didn't put a depreciation expense item on here because it's not a cash out, showing a $272 surplus this year. Again, that's effectively nothing. But again, showing that we have enough revenue to support the expenditures that are in the fund. Any questions on tag? Landfill. Oh, sorry, not landfill. Debt service fund. These numbers come exactly, and why there's not multiple years presented here is you don't compare this fund year to year. You have your scheduled debt service payments. This lays out your general obligation and the levy supporting it. Any questions on debt service fund? Hearing none. Next is the landfill. Maintaining levy funds of 13,000. This was the last year or the 10th installment of the agreement that was entered into. I don't remember the specific vendor. So meaning you will not have that revenue line under miscellaneous revenue anymore. And again, this fund is out there to support, you know, again, portions of the street paving. What that is exactly, I'm not entirely sure. I think that's technically potentially capping. As well as budgeting a small contingency amount for legal. As you can see, we're not budgeting for making this fund net out to zero. So ultimately, as these costs comes in, this body will just get updated. And right, on to recycling. Any questions on recycling?
Did you find out the tipping fees amount on that?
The tipping fee is budgeted for, estimated to be $34,861 for 2023. Conservatively left that at 31,200. And that's charges for service. Good question. In the recycling one, there's actually like a state grant that you received called the Responsible Business Unit grant for that 31,000. Again, you're seeing a small deficit in this fund, but nothing to be concerned about. CDA, a consistent funding, 25,808. There was questions on this raised about where the overall funds are for the CDA. It's approximately 60,000 or 64,000. I think there was a number much less than that, closer to 20,000 that may have
Yeah,
been
it
awarded
was
to this group.
40-something to 20-something, and now it's up to 60-something.
So, I'm very confident that that number is between 60 and 65,000. Again, the only thing that is in the actual CDA budget for next year is the initiate miscellaneous. I heard during the various committee meetings, some conversation about facade initiatives.
Yeah, I was under the understanding we have facade grants
Hey,
funded for next year.
we do, but I don't know what to tell people when they ask me. I'm like, I don't know where we are, so.
Is the recommended to maintain at the same funding
I
as
think it
last year?
Was it 25,000?
25?
Yeah, I think that's the number we.
That sounds right.
That number is updated to be 25,000. So that would result in the total expenditures for that fund being updated to 41,000 with a net loss of 13,842 in that fund. Again, with the 60 to 65,000 cash reserved in that fund, that completely stomachs that small loss. Moving on, capital improvement. So this is everything that will be funded through your borrowing. The ladder truck, the road projects, the front loader, the park shelter maintenance. So then we got to remember, we budget for utilities in a separate fund compared to capital improvements. So the GO portion of the borrower or anticipated borrowing is 1,810,000. That formal financing will come back at a later date. This is just the subsequent expenditures and revenue. Any questions on this? Cable TV fund, no levy amount. The 15,273 is a amount that's going to be frozen in time. That amount will never change unless the state decides to stop funding. Franchise fee revenue, again, that's a percentage of fees for covering a service area that various cable providers are responsible of paying the municipality. And then you see the breakdown of expenditures here with a net change of 4,799. Questions on cable TV?
Yeah, I don't want to go too far in the weeds here, but the maintenance and the equipment. Like, as far as an expenditure, what does that consist of?
No worries. Ooh, interesting.
I know in the past, there were times when an emergency would come up, we'd say, take it out of the cable fund.
So to that extent, I'm seeing like Civic Systems LLC in here. This potentially could be,
We paid for
Okay.
the upgrade. We would, yes, okay, that makes sense.
Okay. So you're gonna see a couple weird budgets here. You don't necessarily qualify for FAP funding every year. This EMS state fund is another fund to consider potentially closing and combining with another fund. This fund does have some surplus yet left in it. It's not a ton, but just the remaining $5,000 is in there really to address any emergency or failure. But it has to meet the definition of FAP. Eligible reimbursement expense. So there's just the limitations to what that can be spent on. Next, recreation. Recreation and the tag center are most commonly combined when we're talking about. So this is separated because one is a governmental fund and one is an enterprise fund. You'll see in this fund, we're anticipating a $426 surplus. The primary sources of revenue here are obviously donations, concession, late fees. Any questions on recreation? Police trust fund, Wisconsin state statutes require you must have if you have a budget, or if you have a fund that, you report out in your financial statements or has activity in it, you must adopt a budget, regardless if there's anything dollar amount in it. So this budget is a 0-0 budget for this fund. This just documents that we did consider that in this budget and we meet the statutory requirement for this fund. Mayville Center Board, the only revenue in this fund is interest income, generates a very minor amount every year. The current funds available in that fund can cover that $2,500 budgeted expenditure. Does anyone have any questions about the activity that goes through there? Fire and EMS, I know a lot of funds have sounded dissimilar, and again, why we need to take a look at our reporting structure to make sure these funds are intentional. This is kind of a trust fund that was established for both fire and EMS, and really an opportunity to utilize some of this fund for capital needs that they've had asked for. So I think it would be a good idea that Tony to potentially at one point in time work with the fire and EMS and say, well, what do you need? And this is how much you have. So again, this fund is generating a minor amount of interest. We have some donation in here that you receive from time to time, and then a very minor amount of expenditures that are in here. Discussion for a later date, the solid waste and recycling fund. The only two expenditure, the one revenue and one expenditures that flow here is your waste contract with picking up and your garbage and recycling. Your current fees bring in approximate revenue of 275. Your actual expenditures are 315,000. I guess what I'm looking for here is guidance from this council for Tony to look into this and ensure that, you know, we're getting charged appropriately. If there's services such as those free dumpsters, those 6 dumpsters, making sure that that's appropriately being accounted for. And if we're paying for additional services or additional dumpsters, to eliminate that activity unless it's brought to this council for additional consideration.
And my guess it is the extra dumpsters for the spring cleaning. They're consistently having to
Cost
bring
that
in.
much though?
Oh, they're huge.
I know I went once, but.
They're about, so for my own municipality, if we have to order a dumpster, it's about $6,000 a dumpster. Which is crazy. They have to cover their tipping fees and everything that when they take it. And they do not take a discount on this. That's their bread and extra
Well,
services.
that's another Jack question.
Okay.
Yeah, we gotta get back to that.
Yep, so I do have a note, based off of kind of this casual conversation that Tony has direction to provide additional information on that and bring back a potential proposal one way or another. Perfect. The customer loan fund, what's represented in here is anticipated revenue brought in by what is commonly considered as special assessments. Oftentimes that means a road project was done, and then the municipality special assesses the various property owners. So this just represents the anticipated collection. There is no anticipated expenditures currently on the customer loan fund. Again, that's one where I would maybe recommend not budgeting for, but coming to the council if there's an opportunity for a specific fund. ARPA, okay. So, Chris just updated that I have one typo in my my draft in the front of the budget. It doesn't change because it's correct. But ARPA, I had previously quoted 27,500 for park mule and park study. That amount should have been 37,500. That is my mistake. It is accounted for correctly in the detailed budget. I am assisting the mayor in determining what your excess fund balance policy is. What I did see in the capital project fund this year was potentially a shortfall of $200,000 transfer in. As you can see, even with the budgeted expenditures next year, you have $219,000 of surplus remaining to spend. Ultimately, once we fully vet out where the exact fund balance we anticipate you guys to be, I may come back to this council and recommend that you utilize that $200,000 to backfill 2023 capital projects in lieu of transferring funds from the general fund to make up that deficit. So there should be in the future discussion about that. This is not that appropriate time. TIP districts, TIP 4, 5, and 6. Ultimately, the TIP budgets are governed by the project plan that is defined. All the amounts in the TIP budgets came from cash pro forma reports provided by Ellers. We took those reports and broke it down into accounts. TIP 4 is receiving a minor amount of increments and a very minimum amount of expenditures. TIP 5, at least currently, is your most active fund. That the biggest portion of this fund is paying back debt service payment. So where the debt service fund pays all other debt, this pays the debt specific to the money that was financed for the TIP projects. Tony and I are looking into the payment in lieu, that 18,000. We right now that developer, we believe the specific dollar amount relates to a Shopko project. The way the current agreement reads is the developer is still responsible for making that payment if they close. We will be bringing an update on that and potentially looking back how many years there was shortfall. TID 6 is getting up and running, much more modest amount of tax increment, still though minor expenditures per cash forma. EMS equipment replacement fund. Again, this is completely in that interest income dash fire should be interest income dash EMS. This fund relies completely on interest. Again, another fund that I think we really need to look into consolidating the various EMS funds. So the EMS department has a very clear direction of what all their funds are available. Next is this park fund or fund 78, another fund that I'm just recommending a zero revenue, zero expenditure. We have this fund open. There has been limited or no activity in this fund. Statutorily, you're required to budget for that fund. The library, I'm actually not going to go into the county fund and the library fund. I'm not going to go over this one really because the library board has sole responsibility in authorizing this budget. Similarly, I provided the water and sewer funds. That commission has the sole responsibility of approving that budget. So again, I put it in this packet to have all the funds, but there's no control that this board has on the overall budget for the water and sewer. All right. A long conversation. I appreciate your time tonight. Any remaining comments or questions before we consider the next agenda item?
I just want to do a reminder about the special assessments pertaining to the Birch Street project. I got notes here, I can barely read myself, but how are we gonna handle that? Are we gonna have to pay that back over 5 years with interest?
So we're looking into, I believe you're talking about phase 2 of the Bridge Street project. So right now, Courtney and Nicole, along with myself, are looking into what, because we didn't receive official notices back from those members, we were unable to formally special assess them this year. Now, that doesn't remove that liability to the city. They still owe those funds. So we're working on issuing a formal letter saying they have until X date to return the letter. If they do not return that letter, the whole amount becomes due immediately. if they return the letter, they are allowed to go on that 5-year amortization schedule. That's another kind of item as we're looking at the revenues, making sure that the city is actually getting all the funds that they're entitled to, whether it be special assessment, various pilot payments and developers.
Right, we'll touch base on that later then.
I have a note to follow up in
All right,
December.
thanks.
You guys sick of me talking yet?
Well,
Are you guys sick of me talking yet?
No, I think we should have a big beer though.
A beer?
oh boy.
All right, I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
All right, nice work. Thanks, Tony and Cameron. So the next item then, after the presentation, is discuss the 2024 budget presentation and budget. Does anybody have anything they wish to discuss further? That's pretty thorough. We kind of handled questions while we were going through, so. Do you have the resolution? So. Here,
I just want to go back over to public comment. I took note that what the one individual that came in and expressed some public comments, I believe all the question had been sufficiently answered. If for some reason this body does not feel that's the case, I can go back and provide additional follow up on the 27th, but the 7 or 8 items I believe I provided.
Or email them or whatever, I don't know.
Yep, I can go back and listen and making sure that he has the right.
well, that's what's. See? Okay, resolution. All right, so seeing as there are no further discussion regarding the budget presentation and budget, we'll move on to item 3. Which is resolution 5893-2023, approved 2024 budget and set the 2023 tax mill rate for the city of Mayville. And I'll just read this in. For the 2024 budget, set the 2023 tax mill rate for the city of Mayville, whereas the 2024 operational budget for the city of Mayville was duly published in the Dodge County Pioneer on November 30th, 2023, and a public hearing was held on December 14th, 2023, in accordance with Wisconsin state statutes. And whereas the Common Council of the city of Mayville does ordain that there is hereby levied a tax and tip levy of $2,782,515.99 upon all taxable property within the city of Mayville, with an approximate mill rate of $5.77, I'm gonna go 5.771951 of $482,075,500 approximate assessed valuation as returned by the assessor in the year 2023. And whereas the comptroller treasurer is hereby authorized and directed to spread the said tax upon the 2023 tax roll of the city of Mayville as approved by the Common Council on December 14th, 2023. Now therefore be it resolved that the Common Council of the city of Mayville does hereby adopt the aforementioned budget passed by the Common Council of this city of Mayville this 14th day of December 2023. Anybody care to make a motion? Motion by Schmidt,
A second.
second by Tillman. Any further discussion?
I have one question, which is that the levy amount in the resolution here, $2,782,550.99. Is that consistent with the proposed levy of $2,736,327 we've been discussing?
Not comparing apples to apples, so what is defined as the local rate or the difference between the general fund, tag, debt service, landfill, recycling, and CDA? That number in the resolution represents the additional increment for the TIP district, which totals $147,150.93. So appropriately accounted for.
Perfect. Any further discussion?
No,
Okay.
thank you, everybody. Joe, thank you for all your hard work, and Tony and.
Let's,
Okay.
no, just a moment. Let's,
Oh,
no,
geez.
but would you please take the roll?
Okay.
It's because I got here a half an hour early.
Joe Gilman,
Aye.
Mike Schmidt,
Aye.
and Ken Newman,
Aye.
and Ken Olson.
Aye.
Motion carries. Resolution passes. Thank you, everybody. Now, Kim, you can.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion, oh, who wants to do a motion?
I'll do that.
Motion by Tillman, second, by Newman. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Have a great night.
I can thank everybody.